On Super Bowl Sunday, Americans will eat roughly 105 million pounds of avocados. That is not a typo, and it is not a metaphor. It is a measured weight of mashed up green fruit, sitting in plastic tubs, getting double dipped at parties from Anchorage to Tampa, and almost every single ounce of it came from one place. Not Mexico broadly. Not even Mexico specifically. One state in Mexico. And a meaningful percentage of every dollar you spent on that guac, somewhere along the way, ended up in the pocket of a cartel. This is a story about the avocado, which sounds like a stupid story because it is one. But it's also a story about how a single agricultural product became one of the most lucrative organized crime franchises in the Western Hemisphere. About how the United States Department of Agriculture is sort of accidentally responsible for it. And about why the next time you see Hass avocados, $1.99 each at a Trader Joe's, you should at least pause to consider that the supply chain behind that sticker passes through approximately 14 guys with assault rifles standing in a lime green orchard. So let's talk about how this happened. And spoiler alert, it has very little to do with avocados. For most of the 20th century, the United States did not eat avocados, like at all. In 1990, the average American ate about 1.5 pounds of avocados a year, which is roughly one avocado, plus a bonus like a free chip at Chipotle. Today, that number is closer to 9 pounds. 9. The avocado, in less than a generation, went from a thing your weird aunt put in salads to a national obsession with its own essay genre about millennials buying houses. Why? 2 reasons. The first is that Americans got really into Mexican food, which is a separate video that I will probably make eventually. The second reason is that in 1997, after a 79-year ban, the USDA finally allowed Mexican avocados into the United States. And the moment that gate opened, things got weird. The ban itself dated back to 1914, when the USDA noticed that Mexican avocados sometimes carried weevils, which are the world's most boring villain. For nearly 8 decades, the only avocados Americans could buy were from California, which produced a perfectly fine but limited number of them, mostly during the summer. In winter, you couldn't get a decent avocado in Cleveland for love or money. So when NAFTA started leaning on the USDA to lift the ban, they finally caved. But there was a catch. Mexican avocados could be imported, but only from one specific state, Michoacán. And only after going through a USDA inspection regime so absurd it might as well have been written by a Bond villain. The reason for the Michoacán-only rule was, on paper, scientific. Michoacán has these volcanic soils, this elevation, this rainy season that, in combination, just so happened to be hostile to the specific weevil species that the USDA was worried about. But the result of this rule was economic. It meant that the only Mexican state legally allowed to sell its avocados to the largest avocado-consuming country in the world was Michoacán. And Michoacán, conveniently, was already growing more avocados than anywhere else on the planet. By the early 2000s, Michoacán was producing about 75% of the avocados consumed in the United States. By the 2020s, depending on the year, that number reaches anywhere from 80 to 95%. We are talking about a single state, slightly smaller than Pennsylvania, that has cornered the market on a fruit that Americans eat in the volume of a mid-sized country's entire annual GDP. This naturally attracted some unwanted attention. See, in the part of the world where the world's avocados happen to grow, there are also a number of organizations that are very, very good at noticing when something starts making a lot of money. These organizations have names like Knights Templar Cartel, Jalisco New Generation Cartel, La Familia Michoacána, and Pueblos Unidos, which sounds like a community center but is in fact an armed faction. And starting around 2009, when the avocado boom really got going, these organizations made a calculated business decision. Drugs are risky. Drugs are illegal. Drugs require smuggling. But avocados? Avocados are legal. The trucks moving them across the border have USDA paperwork. Nobody pulls over an avocado truck. So the cartels did the only sensible thing. They didn't smuggle the avocados, they just taxed them. Here is how it works. If you are an avocado farmer in Tancítaro, Michoacán, which produces the largest avocado tonnage of any municipality on earth, you don't get a choice about whether to pay the cartel. You just pay it. The cartel knows how many trees you have because they sent a guy to count them. They know how many tons of avocados you'll produce because they have spreadsheets. And every time a truck leaves your orchard for a packing plant, they take a cut. Sometimes that cut is per kilogram. Sometimes it's per truck. Sometimes it's a flat monthly tax. The cartels don't publish quarterly earnings, so estimates run wide. Reporting puts the figure between $130 and $200 million a year. To put that in context, that is more money than the cartel chapter operating in Tancítaro could plausibly make from any drug, and it comes with the additional benefit of nobody from the DEA showing up. This was the moment when the avocado stopped being agriculture and started being a protection racket with very nice produce. Now, you might reasonably ask how this is allowed to continue, and the answer is that it isn't exactly. It's just that nobody in a position to stop it has any incentive to. The Mexican federal government's writ in this part of Michoacán is charitably theoretical. Local police are often on the cartel payroll, which is a polite way of saying they have been actively recruited and in some cases swapped uniforms entirely. In 2013, the situation got bad enough that farmers in Tancítaro War formed their own armed militia, called the Autodefensas, who patrolled the orchards in pickup trucks with machine guns to keep the Knights Templar from kidnapping more of their cousins. Which worked, briefly, until rival cartels noticed that the Autodefensas had now created a power vacuum and moved in to fill it. Today, Tancítaro War is essentially a city-state with checkpoints, run partially by the local Growers Association and partially by whichever armed group most recently won the annual lemon orchard-adjacent firefight. Meanwhile, on the American side of this whole arrangement, things continued more or less unchanged. In 2019, the USDA briefly suspended inspections in Michoacán after one of its inspectors was threatened at gunpoint by a cartel-affiliated group that didn't like the inspection results. The suspension lasted about a week before everyone agreed it was probably easier to just send the inspectors back. In 2022, this happened again, this time after another USDA inspector got death threats over a shipment that had been flagged for pests. Again, brief suspension. Again, everyone went back to work. Because the alternative, which is that the United States stops getting avocados, is politically untenable. Imagine being the Secretary of Agriculture who has to explain to America why it's Super Bowl Sunday, and there is no guacamole. You wouldn't survive the news cycle, so the system continues. Michoacán grows the avocados. The cartels tax the avocados. The USDA inspects the avocados. The avocados ride a refrigerated truck across the border. They go through Texas customs. They get distributed to about a dozen wholesalers. And then they end up at a Whole Foods where you pay $2.49 for one, somewhere between 5 and 15 cents of which has, by some estimates, just paid the operating expenses of an organization that also runs methamphetamine across the border and occasionally dissolves people in barrels. If you find that uncomfortable, you should. Most people do when they hear about it. The natural follow-up question is, well, what are we doing about it? And the answer is basically expanding production to other states. In 2022, the USDA agreed to allow Jalisco to start exporting avocados to the United States as well. This was framed in the press as breaking Michoacán's monopoly. It was. It was also breaking it by extending the same exact arrangement to a different state, where, surprise, a different cartel was already in place, taxing those avocados too. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the largest and most violent cartel in Mexico, now collects a piece of every Jalisco avocado that crosses the border. The diversification of supply did not diversify the racket. It diversified the racketeers. This, in some ways, is the part that really tells you what the avocado is. The avocado is not really a fruit. The avocado is a logistical accident. It is what happens when a regulatory rule, a consumer trend, a geographical coincidence, and an organized crime opportunity all line up in the same Venn diagram. And what's wild is that the system, despite being held together by violence and luck, and at least 3 federal agencies actively pretending not to notice, works. The avocados arrive, the shelves are stocked, the guacamole gets eaten, the Super Bowl happens, and somewhere in Michoacán, a guy with an AK-47 is standing next to a tree, calmly counting fruits because that is now his job. So next time you cut one open, give it a moment. Acknowledge it. Because that little green fruit sitting on your countertop has had a longer, more dangerous, and more politically complicated life than almost anything else in your kitchen. It has crossed a border, an inspection regime, a tax structure, and at least one armed checkpoint. It has been counted. It has been tracked. It has been paid for several times before you ever bought it. It is, in short, the most well-traveled fruit in your house. And the next time someone tells you guacamole costs extra, just nod. Because honestly, given what it took to get there, it's still kind of a bargain.